criterion reference test is a style of test which uses test scores to generate a statement about the behavior that can be expected of a person with that score. Most tests and quizzes that are written by school teachers can be considered criterion reference tests. In this case, the objective is simply to see whether the student has learned the material. Criterion referenced assessment can be contrasted with norm-referenced assessment and absative assessment. Criterion reference testing was a major focus of psychometric research in the 1970s. Definition of criterion: a common misunderstanding regarding the term is the meaning of criterion. Many, if not most, criterion reference tests involve a cut score, where the examinee passes if their score exceeds the cut score and fails if it does not. The criterion is not the cut score. The criterion is the domain of subject matter that the test is designed to assess. For example, the criterion may be students should be able to correctly add two single-digit numbers, and the cut score may be that students should correctly answer a minimum of 80% of the questions to pass. The criterion referenced interpretation of a test score identifies the relationship to the subject matter. In the case of a mastery test, this does mean identifying whether the examinee has mastered a specified level of the subject matter by comparing their score to the cut score. However, not all criterion reference tests have a cut score, and the score can simply refer to a person standing on the subject domain. The ACT is an example of this. There is no cut score, it simply is an assessment of the student's knowledge of high school level subject matter. Because of this common misunderstanding, criterion reference tests have also been called standards-based assessments by some education agencies, as students are assessed with regards to standards that define what they should know, as defined by the state. Comparison of criterion referenced and norm-referenced tests. Both terms criterion referenced and norm-referenced were originally coined by Robert Glaser. Unlike a criterion reference test, a norm-reference test indicates whether the test taker did better or worse than other people who took the test. For example, if the criterion is students should be able to correctly add two single-digit numbers, then reasonable test questions might look like, or a criterion reference test would report the student's performance strictly according to whether the individual student correctly answered these questions. A norm-reference test would report primarily whether this student correctly answered more questions compared to other students in the group. Even when testing similar topics, a test which is designed to accurately assess mastery may use different questions than one which is intended to show relative ranking. This is because some questions are better at reflecting actual achievement of students, and some test questions are better at differentiating between the best students and the worst students. A criterion reference test will use questions which were correctly answered by students who know the specific material. A norm reference test will use questions which were correctly answered by the best students and not correctly answered by the worst students. Some tests can provide useful information about both actual achievement and relative ranking. The ACT provides both a ranking and indication of what level is considered necessary to likely success in college. Some argue that the term criterion reference test is a misnomer, since it can refer to the interpretation of the score as well as the test itself. In the previous example, the same score on the ACT can be interpreted in a norm-referenced or criterion-referenced manner. Relationship to high-stakes testing. Many high-profile criterion reference tests are also high-stakes tests, where the results of the test have important implications for the individual examinee. Examples of this include high school graduation examinations and licensure testing, where the test must be passed to work in a profession, such as to become a physician or attorney. However, being a high-stakes test is not specifically a feature of a criterion reference test. It is instead a feature of how an educational or government agency chooses to use the results of the test. Examples: driving tests are criterion referenced tests, because their goal is to see whether the test taker is skilled enough to be granted a driver's license, not to see whether one test taker is more skilled than another test taker. Citizenship tests are usually criterion referenced tests, because their goal is to see whether the test taker is sufficiently familiar with the new country's history and government, not to see whether one test taker is more knowledgeable than another test taker. See also, concept inventory, constructive alignment, educational assessment, ipsative assessment, norm-referenced assessment, psychometrics, standardized test. References